Picture a house the size of a modern garden shed. Now fill it with 6 people, a loom the size of a small car, 2 goats that live indoors between November and March, and enough smoke to cure a side of bacon just by breathing. Add a floor made of packed dirt covered in old rushes that haven't been properly replaced since harvest. Walls that are literally sticks held together with a mixture of clay, dung and animal hair. And one window, covered with a piece of oiled cloth so thin you can see shadows move through it on a bright day. That's it. That's the house. That's where you live. No chimney, no glass, no insulation, no stored heat of any kind. Just the fire in the middle of the room, and whatever warmth 6 bodies pressed together can generate between them. And tonight the fire has gone out. That's where we start. Not with a beautiful winter morning, not with frost on the fields and children laughing in the snow. We start in the absolute dark, in a room that has dropped below freezing while you were sleeping, with the cold pressing down on your face like a wet hand, and the knowledge, the sick, dropping knowledge in your stomach, that the fire went out sometime in the night and nobody noticed. We're going back to England, Tudor England, the winter of 1553 sliding into 1554, the year Queen Mary took the throne after her brother Edward died, before anyone quite knew what that was going to mean. The year that, according to the chroniclers who wrote it down, began the coldest winter England had seen in 40 years. We're not watching this from a distance. We're not reading about it in a history book. We're living it. One family, one village, one winter that they have to get through, using nothing but skill, habit, community, and whatever fuel they can lay their hands on before the cold takes one of them. So, I make these history stories. Honestly, I sometimes wonder what's stranger, that some of you actually sleep to them, or that there's apparently a whole community of people who find the smell of medieval goat and the physics of keeping a fire alive in a drafty cottage genuinely soothing. Either way, here we are. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable under whatever blankets you have, and be grateful, deeply and specifically grateful for central heating. Here we go. Your name is Agnes Sutton. You are 14 years old. You were born in this house, in this village, in the East Riding of Yorkshire, in the year 1539, when Henry VIII was still alive and nobody could have told you what the next decade was going to look like. You know about kings the way you know about weather, as a force that happens to you, mostly at a distance, sometimes with catastrophic consequences, rarely with your consent. The king changed, then the boy king, then the queen. It's been a confusing few years for anyone paying attention, which, in the village of Thornwick, isn't very many people. They're too busy trying to eat. Your father is Thomas Sutton. He's 42 years old, which in 1553 is closer to old than you'd think. His hands are the most remarkable thing about him. They're enormous and calloused and stained a permanent brownish grey from years of handling raw wool, and they can do things with a loom that feel almost like witchcraft if you haven't grown up watching them. He weaves a moderate quality broadcloth that a merchant from York comes to buy twice a year. The money from those 2 sales is basically everything. The garden, the animals, the preserved food, that's survival. The cloth is what lets them actually live. Your mother is Joan. She's 38, though she looks older, the way most women who've carried 7 children and buried 4 of them tend to look older. She doesn't talk about the 4. You know their names because she whispered them to you once in the dark when you were very small and couldn't sleep. She hasn't mentioned them since. She moves through the day with the specific efficiency of someone who has learned not to waste a single motion, not a step, not a handful of flour, not a moment of warmth. Will is 8. He's your brother, the surviving one, and he has the remarkable energy of a child who somehow hasn't yet learned to be tired. He wants to know how everything works. He asks questions constantly, and half the time you answer them just to make him stop, and the other half because you actually don't know the answer, and the question has gotten stuck in your head like a splinter. Baby Marjorie is 9 months old. She doesn't have a personality yet as far as you can tell. She has needs. She has a voice that she uses to communicate those needs at volumes that seem physically impossible for something so small. She smells most of the time of sour milk and something else you've stopped trying to identify. You love her completely in the specific way you love something that requires this much of you. And then there's Grandmother Bess. She's your father's mother, and she is 65 years old, which in Tudor England is an age that feels almost mythological. She survived the sweating sickness in 1528. She survived 2 winters worse than this one, or so she says. She has opinions about everything, and she expresses them without any particular concern for whether you asked. She knows more about keeping a fire alive in a cold house than anyone you've ever met, and right now, that knowledge is more valuable than money. Right now, though, in this moment, she's asleep on her pallet by the wall, and the fire is out, and you're the one who noticed. You wake because of the cold, not a gradual waking, not the slow surfacing from a dream. You go from asleep to awake in one brutal second, because your nose is so cold it hurts, and that particular pain, the pain of cold air on exposed skin, is the kind of thing the body doesn't ignore. Your eyes open to nothing, absolute nothing. Not the soft dark you get in a modern bedroom where light leaks under doors and screens glow, and the streetlights outside make the curtains into dim orange rectangles. This is the dark of before electricity, the dark of before gas, the dark of a room with no windows worth mentioning, and a fire that has, at some point in the night, gone completely cold. For a moment you don't know what you're feeling. Then you know exactly what you're feeling. Your blanket is there, the rough, scratchy wool of it against your chin, and your own body heat has preserved a thin zone of warmth around you, the way a body always does, but outside that zone, an inch past the edge of the blanket, the air is cold enough to make your skin hurt. You breathe in. The smell of a Tudor house in winter is a specific and complicated thing. It hits you in layers. The first layer is wood smoke, always wood smoke, because even a dead fire leaves its ghost in the walls and the rushes and the fabric of every piece of clothing and bedding you own. You have never in your life not smelled of wood smoke. You never will. The second layer is the animals. The 2 goats, Patience and Goodwife, your father named them with a sense of humour that hasn't entirely survived the years, have been living in the back corner of the main room since the first hard frost of October. Goats smell like goats. There's no polite way to describe what goats smell like indoors over a period of months. It's warm and thick and not entirely unpleasant if you've grown up with it, but it is absolutely present, absolutely undeniable, a biological reality that permeates everything. The third layer is the rushes on the floor. They were fresh in August when your mother and you spent 2 days cutting them from the marshy ground near the stream and spreading them over the packed earth. That was 4 months ago. In 4 months, rushes absorb everything. Spilled pottage, goat droppings, mud from outside, the slow organic rot of anything that falls into them and isn't worth retrieving. They'll need changing before spring. Right now they're a carpet of compressed, slightly damp, deeply pungent vegetable matter, and the smell they give off is the smell of everything that's happened in this room since August. The fourth layer is the smell of people, 6 of them sleeping in a space roughly 20 feet by 14 feet. This is normal. This is how everyone you know lives. Privacy is not a concept that has much meaning in Thornwick. The idea of sleeping alone in a room would strike most of your neighbours as either a luxury so extreme it's almost offensive, or a punishment so isolating it would amount to cruelty. And underneath all of it, underneath the smoke and the goats and the rushes and the people, there's a smell you can only describe as cold. The cold itself has a smell, in a room that should be warm and isn't. Something mineral, something that makes your sinuses ache slightly. The smell of air that's dropped below freezing while it was supposed to be protected, supposed to be held back by the walls and the fire and the combined warmth of everyone sleeping here. The fire is out. You sit up. The cold hits you like a wall. You can feel it, actually feel it, on your forearms and on your face and through the wool shift you sleep in. Your breath comes out in a small cloud that you can't see in the dark but can feel when it touches your cheeks and disperses. You need to fix this before anyone else wakes up, before your mother wakes up and sees it, before Marjorie wakes up and needs feeding and starts crying in a cold room. Before Grandmother Bess wakes up and says the thing she always says when something goes wrong. She has a particular tone she uses for preventable disasters. You've heard it enough times that it lives in the back of your skull like a recurring dream. You swing your legs off the pallet. The rushes are cold and damp under your bare feet. Immediately, insistently, aggressively cold. Like stepping onto something half alive and deeply unhappy about it. You stand on them anyway because there's nothing else to stand on, and you take one slow step toward where you know the hearth is, feeling with your toes for the slight change in the floor, the packed clay lip that marks the edge of the fire pit. There, you've found it. You crouch down. The hearth is a shallow depression in the centre of the room, roughly 4 feet across, lined with flat stones along the edge. There's no raised structure, no mantelpiece, no chimney. Just the pit, and above it, a hole in the thatch of the roof through which the smoke is supposed to escape. Most of it does escape, most of it. The rest stays in the room at a height that's roughly uncomfortable for standing adults, which is why your father has a permanently reddish tint to his eyes, which is why everyone over 40 in Thornwick has a slightly persistent cough that they don't think of as unusual because it's been there so long. You reach into the ash. The first thing you feel is the warmth, or rather the memory of warmth. The ash is deep, a winter's accumulation of grey powder and blackened chunks that your mother manages with the careful attention of someone who understands that this pile represents the difference between comfort and genuine danger. You push your fingers in gently, past the cool surface, down where the heat lives, or used to live. There, something warm. Not warm exactly, warmer. A pocket of ash deep down that's still holding something. Your heart does a small thing in your chest. Not quite hope. Something more practical than hope. Assessment. There might be something there. There might not. You need to check without wasting it. You know what to do because you've watched your mother do it 100 times, and because Grandmother Bess sat you down when you were 10 and explained the logic of the fire like she was explaining a philosophy of life, which in a way she was. The fire is not a thing you have, she said. It is a thing you tend. You don't own a fire, you serve it. Every morning before it has given you permission to rest, every night before you sleep, the fire asks nothing of you but attention and fuel and respect. Give it those, and it will give you everything. Neglect it for one night, and you will spend the next 3 days paying. One night, last night, somewhere in the dark hours, whoever had the fire watch fell asleep. You think it was Will. You put him on watch because you were exhausted from 3 days of carding raw wool until your fingers bled, and because 8-year-olds are supposed to be able to stay awake for 2 hours while a fire burns down to coals. Apparently not all of them can. You're not angry at Will. You don't have the luxury of anger right now. Anger is warm and you are cold and you need to be useful. You find the small iron pot that sits at the edge of the hearth. Inside it, wrapped in a piece of old linen and buried under 2 inches of ash, your mother keeps the fire starter. A piece of hardened tinder fungus, dried perfectly over the summer. A small curl of dried bark from a birch tree. And the flint and steel that your father's father brought back from somewhere and that your grandmother treats like the family's most precious object, which it basically is. You also need something to catch. You reach to your left, feeling along the wall. Your hand finds the basket. Rough-woven willow, slightly sticky with old sap. Inside it, the smallest and driest pieces of wood. Kindling, yes, but more specifically, the specific grade of kindling you need right now. The stuff that catches from the tiniest possible spark. Thin shavings of dry ash wood, twisted strips of dried grass your mother saved from August, a handful of the dried bracken that Grandmother Bess collects from the hillside every autumn, specifically for mornings like this one. You arrange these by touch. You've done this in the dark before. You know the shape of it. Now the ember. You lean down close to the hearth and blow, very gently, into the spot where your fingers found the warmth. The ash rises and drifts and catches in your nostrils. You breathe it in, that particular bite of cold ash in the back of the throat, and you keep blowing. Slow, steady. Nothing for a long moment. Then something. A faint, almost imagined glow. A patch of ash the colour of a very old sunset. You blow again. The glow brightens, becomes something definite. A coal. Small as your thumbnail and bright orange at its heart and the most beautiful thing you've seen in weeks. You lay the bracken over it with fingers you can barely feel anymore, and you blow one more time, and the bracken catches with a sound like a held breath being released, a soft hiss and crackle. And then there's a flame, small and wavering and genuinely miraculous, throwing just enough light to show you the dim shapes of the room around you. 6 sleeping people, 2 goats, 1 basket of kindling, 1 tiny flame. You build it up piece by piece, adding the dried grass, then the thin shavings, then a slightly larger piece of wood, then another. You work slowly and deliberately the way you've been taught. Too fast and you smother it. Too slow and it goes out before it can establish itself. A fire in its first minutes is as fragile as anything alive. You have to treat it that way. By the time the room holds something you'd call proper firelight, maybe 20 minutes have passed. 20 minutes of kneeling on cold rushes in a cold room, fingers clumsy and eyes watering from the smoke, feeding this small thing until it becomes a big thing. Your knees hurt. Your fingers have thawing pins and needles in them. Your back is stiff from bending over. But the fire is burning, and the cold, the terrible pressing cold of the dead fire room, has already begun very slightly to retreat. This is where we need to stop for a moment because I want you to really understand what you're working with here. The Tudor house, the specific physical, architectural reality of the Tudor house. And when I say Tudor house, I don't mean the black and white half-timbered buildings with the overhanging upper stories that you've seen in photographs of Shrewsbury or York or the Shambles. Those are the nice ones. Those are the merchant houses, the prosperous tradesmen's houses. Those are what people in the upper middle of Tudor society lived in. What we're talking about is a yeoman farmer or craftsman's house, which is what the vast majority of people actually inhabited. And those houses are a completely different proposition. The walls are wattle and daub. That means a framework of woven sticks, and then a plaster made from clay, sand, animal dung and chopped straw, applied over it in layers and allowed to dry. It's actually not bad insulation, all things considered. A modern building engineer looking at it would be somewhat impressed by the practical physics. The thick walls hold heat reasonably well when they're sound. After decades of weather, the daub cracks. Water gets in. Frost expands in the cracks. More cracking. In the corner near the back of your room where the north wind hits in winter, there's a crack running from floor to roof that's been there since you were small. Your father stuffed it with old rags last October. The rags help. They do not solve the problem. The roof is thatch, which is actually excellent insulation. Thatch has been keeping roofs warm for 8,000 years because the compressed dry straw traps air remarkably well. But it also hosts things: birds, mice, insects. In summer, the thatch above your sleeping space is busy with small lives conducting their small business. In winter, those lives push deeper into the warmth, which means sometimes things fall through the ceiling. Not often. Just enough that you always sleep with your face slightly covered. The floor is compressed earth. It's been compressed for so many generations of feet that it's almost like stone in places, but it's not stone, and it breathes. And in winter, it breathes cold. A sustained exhalation of cold from the ground below that no amount of rushes quite overcomes. The window, one of them, is a hole in the wall roughly 2 feet across and 18 inches high. In summer it has a wooden shutter, but the shutter lets in too much draught. So in winter your mother keeps it covered with a piece of oiled linen stretched over a wooden frame. The oil makes it slightly translucent. You can tell on a bright day when it's daylight outside. You cannot tell much else. On a cloudy winter day, that window provides approximately the same light as a very tired candle. The door is wood, solid, thick oak planks held together with iron fittings, and actually pretty good at keeping out draughts. There's a leather curtain on the inside that your mother pulls across it in cold weather for extra insulation. When the wind is from the east, the curtain moves anyway. You can feel it move from across the room. There is no glass anywhere in this house. Glass exists in Tudor England. Churches have it. Very wealthy people have it. Some of the grander merchants' houses in York have glass in their windows. You've never touched a piece of window glass in your life. So, the fire. The fire is not a feature of your house. The fire is not an amenity, not a comfort, not a pleasant thing to sit in front of on a cold night with a book and a cup of something warm. The fire is the engine that the house runs on. It cooks the food. It heats the water. It dries the clothes when they're wet from rain or snow. It keeps the bread from going stale too fast. It heats the air that everyone breathes. It's the only light source after dark that doesn't cost money. It kills, with its warmth, the parasites in the bedding and the floor that would otherwise be constantly worse than they already are. Without the fire, the house drops, on a night like last night, to somewhere around 30 degrees Fahrenheit inside, maybe colder. The water in the ceramic jug near the wall will freeze. The baby will wake up screaming. Old Bess will feel it in every joint she has. Your father, who works long hours at his loom and needs to sleep, will wake shivering and spend the day cold and tired and not quite able to produce the evenness of weave that separates good cloth from bad cloth. Everything depends on the fire. Everything you are doing this morning, everything you'll do all day, is organised around the fire's needs and your family's relationship to it. That's the Tudor winter. That's the architecture of survival. Light comes through the window in that pale, indefinite way winter light comes, somewhere between grey and white, like the world is reconsidering whether daylight was a good idea. Marjorie wakes up first. She always does. Her timing is almost impressive in how reliable it is. The absolute earliest moment that waking up is even slightly plausible, and she's awake, and she's communicating her displeasure at this fact at a volume that suggests she's genuinely surprised it keeps happening to her every morning. Your mother moves before you can react. Motherhood by this point has made Joan Sutton fast in a specific, targeted way. She goes from flat on her back to sitting, to cross-legged with this baby nursing in a motion so practised it barely qualifies as movement. She does it with her eyes still mostly closed. She says nothing. Will sits up on his side of the pallet you share with him, and his hair is doing the thing it does, sticking out at angles that suggest his head encountered significant turbulence during the night. He looks at you. He looks at the fire. He looks back at you. Something passes across his face that's halfway between guilt and hope. I fell asleep, he says. I know. I tried. I kept waking up. The third time I woke up, the fire was really low, so I put on a big piece and... Will. And I thought, if I put a big piece it would last all night, so I... Will, it's done. The fire's going. He blinks, looks at the fire. The relief on his face is so physical it's almost architectural. He rearranges his entire body around it, 8 years old and carrying the specific weight of a mistake that could have been serious and wasn't quite. Agnes, that's Grandmother Bess, from her pallet near the wall, still horizontal, eyes closed. Was it out completely? Nearly. I found an ember. A pause. You can hear her doing the calculation, not with numbers, with years of experience, with the built-up knowledge of every winter she's survived, assessing how bad it was, how close it came. Put 2 more pieces on, she says, medium ones, then leave it alone for 10 minutes. You do. The fire, now actually established, pulls the room towards something bearable. It'll be an hour before it's warm in any real sense. But the sharp edge of the cold begins to soften. The air, which had a quality like touching metal, becomes something you can breathe without wincing. Your father is the last to wake. He surfaces slowly, the way he always does, surfacing from sleep the way a man comes up from deep water. He sits on the edge of the pallet. He puts his enormous wool-stained hands on his knees. He stares at the fire for a moment, doing his own assessment, reading it the way he reads the tension in threads on his loom. Cold night, he says. Yes. This from your mother, who is not looking at Will, which is its own kind of mercy. Your father nods. He doesn't say anything else. He stands up, joints cracking, and goes to the basin near the door. The water in the basin has a thin skim of ice on it. He breaks it with his knuckle. The sound it makes, A small, precise crack in the quiet of the early morning is one of the sounds of winter. You hear it every cold morning. It's the sound of the season asserting itself, reminding you of the terms. He washes his face and hands with the iced water. He does not gasp or complain. He simply does it. The way you do a thing you've done every morning for 40 years regardless of the circumstances. You should do the same. You know this. You've been putting it off since you got up, conducting all your fire rescue work with a private understanding that eventually you'd have to cross the room and wash in the cold water, and there would be no avoiding how cold the water was going to be. You cross the room, you wash. The water is so cold it feels for a moment like it's burning. Your face goes numb from the eyes down. Your fingers, already stiff from crouching over the hearth, protest with a specificity that borders on articulate. You dry your hands on the rough linen cloth hanging by the basin and stand there for a moment with your face still dripping, letting the shock of it settle into something manageable. This is how you start every day from October to April. You have never once started one of these mornings and thought, good, yes, cold water on the face, excellent choice. You do it because you have to, because your mother does it, because your father does it, because the alternative, which is not washing, has consequences that your grandmother would describe at length if you gave her the opening. Cleanliness in Tudor England is not the cleanliness you know. You don't have running water. You don't have soap in the modern sense. You have lye soap that your mother makes herself in autumn from wood ash and rendered fat, and it is harsh enough that you use it sparingly. You have the basin. You have a ewer that your father fills from the well twice a day. You wash your face and hands in the morning. You wash your hair roughly once a month over the basin, a process that involves a lot of cold water and lye soap, and your mother working through your hair with a wooden comb that catches on everything. You wash the rest of yourself somewhat less often, standing in the back room with a cloth and a bucket of water that you've warmed slightly by the fire, which takes planning and fuel you're not always willing to spend on something that could be managed with somewhat less warmth. This is not a failure of hygiene standards. This is the physics of winter survival. Every bucket of water that needs to be warm requires fuel to heat it. Fuel is finite. Fuel is right now the central resource you're managing. Your body, by November, knows the smell of itself and of the people it lives with, and that smell is part of the landscape in the same way that the smell of goats is part of the landscape. You can smell strangers because they smell different. You can tell, walking into a house, what they burned last night and whether they have animals and what they cooked for supper. Everyone can. It's information, the way all smells are information, before the modern age decided that information should be odourless. Getting dressed in a Tudor winter is, in itself, a small project. You don't take your clothes off to sleep. This is worth saying clearly. You sleep in your clothes. Or rather, you sleep in a subset of your clothes, specifically the lighter inner garments. The shift, which is a long linen underdress that reaches past your knees. Woolen hose that you pull up and tie, slightly too tight at the knee where the garter has lost most of its elasticity. That's it. That's what you sleep in. Over that goes the kirtle. This is a fitted gown, roughly ankle length, made from a serviceable dark blue wool that was new when you were 11 and has since been let out twice and mended more times than you can count. It's warm. It's the warmest garment you own. The wool is the kind of heavy, tightly woven cloth that your father produces, dense enough to actually resist wind when it's not wet, and it's lined from the waist down with a layer of slightly thinner wool that your mother added last autumn as the lining started to thin. You pull it over your head and get your arms through. The wool scratches slightly at your neck, at the inside of your wrists. It's been scratching your wrists since November, and by January you'll have a small red patch there from the friction. This is normal. Everyone has something like this. You stop noticing it around December. Over the kirtle, in winter, goes the overgown. Yours is your mother's old one, inherited 2 years ago, slightly too big in the shoulders and slightly too long in the hem. It's a brownish grey that might once have been a definite colour. It has wide sleeves and a collar that can be folded up against the neck on cold days. Which today is. You fold it up. Shoes are the last thing. They're leather, plain, and they fit the way leather shoes that have gotten wet multiple times and dried somewhat irregularly tend to fit, which is to say with a kind of opinionated personality. The left one is slightly tighter than the right. They have wooden soles, the patterns that clip over them for going outside, and you'll need those today because yesterday it snowed briefly, and the yard outside will be a study in hidden ice beneath a deceptive layer of white. You look at yourself reflected in the dull surface of the copper pot that hangs near the hearth. Brown hair somewhat flattened on the side you slept on. A face that your mother calls strong-featured, which you've decided is the kind description. A smudge of ash on your left cheek from the firework this morning. You wipe it off with your thumb, which redistributes it slightly rather than removing it, but close enough. You're 14 years old. You're dressed for a day in a house that is currently somewhere around 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and will not get meaningfully warmer than 60 degrees until February at the earliest, and the first thing on your list is to figure out how much wood you have and whether it's enough. The answer, you already know, is going to be no. The wood is stored in the lean-to against the outside of the east wall. Your father built it 6 years ago from timber salvage from a collapsed barn at the edge of the village, and it does its job of keeping the rain off the wood mostly. The snow, being more creative than rain in its entry methods, gets in at the open front and at the gaps between the boards. You unlatch the door and step outside. The cold outside is a different quality to the cold inside. Inside, the cold is a failure, a negative space where warmth should be. Outside, the cold is the whole point. It's dense and bright, and it sits in your lungs when you breathe like something solid. The yard is white, a thin white, not the deep white of a serious snowfall, just the preliminary white of the first significant freeze, the kind that coats everything in a layer about as thick as your thumbnail. The well in the middle of the yard has ice around its base. The water bucket hanging from the well frame is frozen solid and has cracked along one side, which means someone needs to haul it in and put it by the fire to thaw before it splits completely. The light has the quality of early winter morning in the north of England, which is to say it is technically light but not what you'd call convincingly daylight. The sun, somewhere behind the flat grey lid of sky, is contributing a diffuse brightness that allows you to see things but doesn't illuminate them particularly, doesn't give them shadows, makes the world look slightly like a drawing that someone started and then thought better of. You cross the yard. The pattering sound of your patterns on ice, small and precise, and each one a small negotiation between you and the surface. You open the lean-to, count the woodpile that was full in October, that your father and the 2 men he hired for 2 days in September had stacked to the roofline, is roughly a third of what it was. This is November. You have, if the weather holds at its current severity without getting worse, which it is almost certainly going to, roughly 4 months of winter left. A third of the wood. 4 months of winter. These numbers do not produce a comfortable equation. You stand in the doorway of the lean-to and look at the pile for a moment, turning the problem over. Your breath makes clouds. Somewhere at the edge of the village, something is moving, a shape against the white. Your neighbour Marjorie Hobson heading toward the well with her bucket, walking with the slightly careful gait of someone who has learned not to trust the surface under her feet. You take what you need for the morning and go back inside. Breakfast is pottage. It is almost always pottage. In winter, it is exclusively pottage, with variations that you could describe as either diverse or desperately repetitive, depending on your mood and how recently you last had it. Pottage is everything cooked in water. That's basically the definition. You start with water. You add grain, oats or dried peas or barley, depending on what you have. You add whatever vegetables are available. In late autumn, there are still onions from the store and dried herbs tied in bunches from the rafters and the last of the dried beans. In December and January, the variety will narrow. By February, if February is bad, you'll be looking at dried peas and onions and very little else, and the dried peas will have been through the pot enough times that they're a memory of themselves, soft and grey and tasting of mostly nothing. Your mother is already at the pot. She moves around the fire with a practised economy, adding water from the ewer, stirring in the oats, hanging the pot from the iron hook over the fire at the exact height that experience has taught her, produces the right simmer. She does all of this without looking at what her hands are doing, because her hands know. She's looking at Marjorie, who is on her back on the pallet, both fists in her mouth, watching the smoke rise toward the hole in the roof with the expression of someone who's found everything about this situation more interesting than expected. The smell of oats cooking in water is one of the smells of winter. Hot starch and something slightly nutty, and the thin, clean smell of something becoming food that wasn't quite food yet. It spreads from the fire and fills the room and does something specific to the air, warms it slightly beyond just the fire, changes the quality of it from heated air to inhabited air. Will is sitting on the floor near the fire, close enough that the front of him is warm and the back of him is still cold, turning slowly every few minutes the way children do when they haven't quite figured out that you can't be warm in two directions at once. He has a piece of bread from yesterday that he's eating with both hands and absolute concentration. The bread is from 2 days ago, technically. It's the end of a round loaf that your mother baked on the previous baking day, which happens twice a week. And this piece has gone from fresh to firm to what would charitably be called sturdy. In summer, bread goes stale on the 3rd day and mouldy by the 4th. In winter, it goes stale and stays stale, which is better. Will doesn't seem to notice or care. He eats the bread the way he eats everything, with complete commitment and no commentary. You sit by the fire. Your grandmother settles beside you, slow and deliberate, her joints announcing themselves with small sounds as she lowers herself to the stool. She's wrapped in her winter shawl, a large square of heavy brown wool that she drapes over her shoulders and crosses over her chest and tucks in somewhere, a garment that seems to generate its own warmth just by being old and enormous and woven by someone with strong opinions about the cold. Wood, she says, not a question. Low. I know it's low. How low? You tell her what you saw. The 3rd of the pile. She nods. She does the same calculation you did and arrives at the same answer, and her face does the specific thing it does when the answer is a problem. A slight tightening around the eyes, a compression of the mouth, a settling of the shoulders. We'll need to go up the hill, she says, There'll be fallen branches after the wind last week. Father said the East Woods. The East Woods belong to Master Holden, same as they did last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. She says this with a flatness that communicates everything about what she thinks of this arrangement. But the common land at the top of Brant Hill is still common, and nobody's taken everything up there yet. We go today, before more snow. Today, in this cold. You look at the window, at the thin grey light coming through the oiled cloth. Today. The fuel question. This is the heart of everything in a Tudor winter, so let me explain the entire situation, because it's more complicated than just go get more wood. Fuel in Tudor England is not a simple matter of supply and demand. Wood is the primary fuel for heating and cooking. This is obvious. What is not obvious is that the wood supply in England by the mid-1500s is under significant pressure. A century of shipbuilding, charcoal production for iron, smelting, and the basic needs of a growing population have put a genuine strain on woodland resources. The crown and the nobility control most of the good woodland. The rights to take wood from common land are real and legally protected, but the common land has limits, and by the second half of a hard winter, those limits become visible. The alternatives to wood are also constrained by class. Sea coal, which is actually the same coal you know, mined and brought by ship from the coalfields of the northeast, is available in the larger towns and cities. In London, by this period, its use is spreading among the urban poor. In a village in the East Riding of Yorkshire in 1553, it is technically available if you know the right merchant in the right market town, but it costs money you may not have, and it requires a chimney, or at least a better managed fire than the open hearth, or the sulphur content makes the air in a sealed room genuinely dangerous. Peat is used in some regions, particularly in the fens and the north. Your family burns some peat, cut in summer and dried, but the local supply is limited, and what you've stored runs out faster than the wood. Dried dung is also burned. You burn dried cow and goat dung in the fire. You do this without particular ceremony or comment, because it works, and because in winter you burn what works. It doesn't smell good. It smells like burning dung, which is exactly what it is, but it gives heat, and heat is heat. So your fuel strategy in winter is a complicated mix. The stored wood supplemented by gathered deadfall from common land, supplemented by peat, supplemented by dried dung, managed with the careful attention of someone who knows that every piece of wood is a finite resource and that running out of fuel in February is not a theoretical inconvenience, but a direct threat to whether everyone is alive in March. There is also the question of how you burn it. A large, enthusiastic fire burning constantly might feel safer in terms of warmth. But a large fire consumes your wood supply in weeks. The trick, the skill, the thing that Grandmother Bess has spent 65 years refining into something close to an art form, is the management of the fire's intensity. You don't need a roaring fire. You need a fire that maintains enough heat to keep the room at a survivable temperature, to cook the food, to heat the water, to do the work it needs to do, while consuming as little fuel as possible. This is a constant optimization, a problem in thermal physics that your family solves every day through intuition and habit, and the accumulated knowledge of generations. The damping down of the fire at night, your mother's system for burying the best coals in ash to preserve them, building a shell of compressed ash that slows combustion without killing it, allowing the fire to survive the night on almost nothing. This strategic use of larger and smaller pieces, because a slow burn through a heavy log gives you more heat per unit of wood than a fast burn through kindling. The way the position of the pot over the fire matters, how close is too close and wastes heat, how far is too far and barely cooks. This knowledge is not written down anywhere. It lives in hands and habit. It gets transmitted from parent to child by doing it together, by making mistakes and having them corrected, by the specific humiliation of watching someone older point out that you've positioned the pot wrong and wasted 20 minutes of cooking time. You've been watching it for 14 years. You're beginning to think you almost understand it. After breakfast, which is eaten in the specific silence of people who are all slightly cold and slightly tired, and thinking about the day's work the household divides, your father goes to the loom. This is always the first thing. The loom is in the main room, its wooden frame dominating the space the way furniture of serious purpose tends to dominate a room, making everything else arrange itself around it. It's a horizontal floor loom, large and heavy, its parts worn smooth by years of hands and feet working the same surfaces. He's in the middle of a length of cloth that needs to be finished before the merchant's agent comes from York in 3 weeks. The cloth matters. You need to understand how much the cloth matters. Those 3 weeks and the money the agent will bring are the financial event of your winter. Without that money, the second half of winter, the lean months, January and February, and the early, grudging weeks of March, become something much harder than they already are. So the loom runs, even on cold mornings, even when your father's breath makes clouds and his fingers are stiff, and the shuttle moves with slightly less precision than it should. The loom runs because it has to, because the cloth has to be finished, because that money is not optional. The sound of the loom is the sound of your father. The rhythmic thump of the beater bar, the sliding click of the shuttle, the creak of the treadles under his feet. You've heard it your whole life. In summer it comes through the open windows and mixes with the outside world. In winter it fills the sealed room, regular as breathing, steady as his heartbeat. Your mother is at the spinning. She spins while Marjorie sleeps or nurses, her distaff tucked under her arm, her fingers drawing out the fibre with the particular rhythm of someone who can do this and think about something else entirely at the same time. The thread she makes is the same thread your father will eventually weave. Everything in the cycle connects to everything else. Will is supposed to be carding. Carding is the process of combing raw wool with paddle-like tools set with fine teeth to separate and align the fibres before spinning. It is the task children are set to do because it requires patience and some dexterity, but not the years of skill that weaving and spinning demand. Will hates carding with a passionate specificity. He does it with the focused resentment of someone who is 8 years old and is already old enough to notice that this particular task is endless and thankless, and the wool always seems to be exactly as uncarded as it was before he started. You take 2 wooden buckets and go out to the well. The well is in the centre of the village yard, which is the open space around which Thornwick organises itself. The village isn't large, maybe 40 households, maybe 150 people in a normal year. Fewer now that the sweating sickness came through 6 years ago and took 11 of them, including 2 of your own that weren't Will or Marjorie. The well is the social centre of the morning in a way that nothing else quite is. Everyone needs water. Everyone comes to the well. In summer, this produces a kind of community, conversation, the exchange of information, the small negotiations and gossip that keep a village running as a social organism. In winter, it produces a tighter version of the same. People are colder and moving faster and less interested in extended conversation, but the information still moves. Who's sick? How bad the cold is going to get? Whether the miller has flour? Whether anyone's seen the state of the road to the market town? Margaret Hobson is there when you arrive. She's a large woman in her late 40s with forearms that make you wonder if she's related to the well itself, and she's been Thornwick's primary gossip since before you were born, in the sense that she processes and redistributes information faster and more thoroughly than anyone else, and that this is a social function the village would be worse without, even if it's occasionally inconvenient. Agnes Sutton, she looks you over. Your father's fire went out in the night. This is not a question. We managed it, you say. I could smell the cold in your chimney when I passed at first light. She says this without judgment. Your grandmother's taking you up Brant Hill. The speed at which this information has travelled from Grandmother Bess forming the idea roughly 30 minutes ago to Margaret Hobson knowing about it is genuinely impressive. This morning, you say, take the path past the Miller's Oak, not the straight way. The straight way's iced over. Tom Wren's boy went down it yesterday and turned his ankle. Thank you, Margaret. Your father's looking thin. She says this with real concern. In Thornwick, looking thin in winter is an observation rather than a compliment. It means someone's not eating enough, which in November means resources are either short or being mismanaged. Joe not getting enough from the stores? We're fine, you say, a reflex answer, and then, because Margaret Hobson will know the difference. Father works early and late. The merchant's deadline. She nods. This is a known quantity. Tell Joan I have extra dried beans if she needs. We put up more than we need this year. She says this casually, maintaining both the offer and her dignity, and yours. This is village welfare in Tudor England. No institution, no system. Just Margaret Hobson standing at a well and mentioning she has extra beans in the way. That means we have more than you right now, and you can have some and nobody needs to make it into a thing. I'll tell her, you say. You haul the water up. The rope is cold and rough against your palms, and the bucket is heavy when it comes up, and you fill your 2 carriers and lift them and head back across the yard, with the weight of them pulling at your shoulders, your feet finding the less ice patches, your breath coming short and white and steady. Grandmother Bess is ready to go when you get back. She's wrapped in layers that make her look slightly like a very opinionated bundle of wool, with a shawl over her coif and her oldest shoes, and a walking stick she cut from a hazel branch in summer specifically for winter walking, with a slight crook at the top that her hand fits perfectly. She's also carrying a bag, a large heavy canvas bag with leather handles that she has owned as long as you can remember, which she uses for everything from carrying vegetables to storing documents, to apparently gathering fuel from a hillside in November. You'll carry the bag when it's full, she tells you. I know. I'll carry it up. My hands can manage going up. Coming down's another thing. She says this with the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her own limitations that characterises people who've been practical about their bodies for 65 years. She knows what she can do. She knows what she can't. She doesn't pretend about either. You go out. The cold greets you the way it always does on the second step outside, the first step being a kind of acclimatisation, and the second being when the full reality of the temperature makes itself known to your body. Your ears start hurting immediately. You pull your coif tighter. Your mother's coif, actually, the extra one she gave you last winter when yours finally gave up. White linen, going slightly grey in the way white linen goes when it's been washed in cold water too many times. The path through the village and out the north side is frozen mud, which is actually easier to walk on than wet mud, but requires a different kind of attention because frozen mud is uneven in ways that can turn your ankle with no warning. You walk with your eyes on the ground. Grandmother Bess does the same. You've been doing this since you could walk, this heads down attention to the surface under your feet, and it has become so habitual that you can navigate and look at the ground at the same time without quite experiencing them as separate activities. Margaret Hobson's shortcut, past the miller's oak, the enormous old tree on the edge of the village that's been there so long nobody remembers when it wasn't. Its roots have buckled the path around it into something you have to step over carefully, but above the roots the ground is sheltered by the massive spread of its bare branches, and the snow hasn't settled there, and the footing is just mud rather than ice, over mud. Past the oak, the path begins to climb. Brant Hill is not, by any objective standard, an impressive hill. It's a moderate rise of roughly 200 feet above the valley floor, with common grazing land on its upper slopes and a belt of mixed woodland below that. In summer, the children go blackberrying on its lower slopes. These sheep graze the upper slopes from April to October. The view from the top, on a clear day, takes in the surrounding farmland in all directions, the church tower of the next village visible over a rise to the east, the line of the moors faint and dark to the north. Today the view from the top will be grey and white and cold, and that's fine. You're not going for the view. You're going for the fallen branches. After last week's wind, which had a quality of genuine violence to it, there should be branches down across the upper path and in the edge of the woodland. Branches that are too small to be worth taking by anyone with a woodman's saw and a cart, but absolutely worth taking if you have a canvas bag and time. The climb. Your legs warm up as you climb, the specific warming of muscle working against cold air, a warmth that lives inside the body and doesn't quite reach the skin. Your fingers are still cold where they grip the empty bag. Your face is cold. Your ears stopped hurting after the first 5 minutes and settled into a sustained numbness that will last until you're back by the fire. Grandmother Bess climbs with the slow determination of someone who's been climbing hills since before your father was born. She doesn't go fast. She doesn't vary her pace. She just goes up, each step placed with the precision of someone who has learned not to trust their knees in the cold, her stick finding the ground before her foot does, the two of them working together with the rhythmic patience of something that's found its method. Cold like this in 62, she says, not looking up. She's talking about 1502, 50 years ago, when she was 15. Maybe worse. What did you do? The same as you do. You do what you have to. She pauses for a breath. In 62, we ran out of wood by February. My father had to burn the spare furniture. The good table that his father made, the one with the carved legs. Another pause. He never stopped being sad about that table. You think about the furniture in your house, the table, the stools, the heavy chest where the good cloth and the documents are kept. Did everyone manage? Not everyone. She says it simply, without dramping it down and without exaggerating it. Old Walter Purser and his wife. He'd been ill since autumn. When the cold came hard in January, they didn't last 3 days. She's still climbing, eyes still on the ground. And the Hobson child, the little one, that same cold took her. Marjorie, her name was. Small thing, maybe 2 years old. You look at her. She doesn't look back, still focused on the path. I think sometimes your mother chose that name thinking of her, she says, though she's never said so. Your mother doesn't talk about the ones she's lost. The wind comes from the north as you approach the top of the hill, and it has an edge to it that your body registers as something slightly hostile, a cutting quality that finds the gaps between your layers and enters them. You pull your shawl tighter across your chest. You keep moving because moving is the only way to stay warm once you're out here, and stopping is what happens at the top when you've done what you came to do. There's a woman already at the tree line when you get there. She's roughly your grandmother's age, grey-haired and broad-shouldered, in a dark blue dress with a heavy woolen cloak pulled around her. She has 2 older children with her, a boy maybe 11 and a girl maybe 9, and they're working with a confidence that suggests they've done this before, pulling branches from where they've blown against the trees, breaking what can be broken, piling what can't be moved. Grandmother Bess raises her hand. The woman raises hers. Nora, says your grandmother. Bess. They say it the way people greet each other when they've known each other for 40 years and have no need to perform friendliness. It is the greeting of 2 people who have shared enough winters that the cold is a language they both speak. Your side's got the worst of the branches, Nora says, nodding toward the northeast edge of the wood. The big ones, but watch the oak by the path. The main branch is split and ready to come down. Don't go under it. Your grandmother nods. She turns to you. The northeast edge. Take the bag. The work is simple and specific and cold. You move through the edge of the woodland, finding where the wind threw down branches, testing each one. Too green to burn well, too rotten to give heat, or just right, that sweet spot of seasoned deadfall that will burn slow and hot. You break what breaks, fill the bag with what you find. The wood is cold and rough in your hands. Bark comes away in flakes. Some pieces have ice in the cracks of them, a thin skin of ice that makes them briefly much colder than anything has a right to be when you grip them. The bag grows heavy. Your hands grow red. Your back begins to object to the combination of bending and lifting with a specificity that feels personal. You fill the bag until you can barely lift it. Then you carry it home. The carrying down is harder than the gathering. The weight of it pulls at your shoulder and shifts when you shift, finding new ways to be awkward with each step. The path down is steeper than the path up felt, somehow, the way paths always are, and the iced sections that you stepped over carefully on the way up now require the same care with 20 pounds of wood on your back. Grandmother Bess walks beside you and occasionally suggests a better placement of your foot. Left to the edge, the mud's firmer there. Now straight down to the rock won't slide. Her voice is calm, matter-of-fact, as if guiding someone down an icy hill with a sack of wood is just another form of the domestic management she's been doing her entire life. Which it is. You make it down without falling. This feels, in the moment, like a genuine achievement. Back inside. The fire has burned while you were gone, fed by Will, who actually managed to add the right size pieces at roughly the right time, prompted by your mother's periodic instruction from across the room. The room is warmer than when you left. Warm in the specific Tudor way. Warm if you're sitting close to the fire, less warm at the table, cool near the wall, cold in the corners where the draught comes in. You drop the bag near the wood pile. Your hands don't properly open when you try to release it. The cold has done something to the muscles, tightened them into the shape of gripping, and you have to consciously, deliberately, Make each finger straighten. It takes a moment. Grandmother Bess, beside you, shakes her hands one at a time, working the same stiffness out. Stack it near the door, she says. Inside, but not too close to the fire. Needs to keep drying. You stack it. The tally in your head, which you've been running since you saw the wood pile this morning, updates slightly. Not enough. Not enough for 4 months, but better than it was. And there'll be more days on the hill, if the weather holds, if it doesn't freeze harder, if the paths stay manageable, if the winter turns on, if's the way a wheel turns on an axle. Candles. We should talk about candles because they're going to matter as the day gets shorter and the nights get longer, and because the candle situation in a Tudor household is another one of those resource management problems that runs below the surface of everything. You have tallow candles. Tallow is rendered animal fat, mutton fat being the most common source, and it makes a candle that works but has opinions about it. A tallow candle burns with a softer, slightly yellowish light that gutters in draught and smells, as it burns, of what it is. Not unpleasant if you grew up with it. Not exactly the neutral, odourless ambience of modern candles either. The other option is rush lights. You make these yourself in summer by gathering rushes and peeling most of the green outer layer off them, leaving a core with one thin strip of skin to hold it together, then dipping them in hot fat. A rush light lasts about 20 minutes. They give a small, decent light. They're free to make if you have the fat, which in summer you do. Beeswax candles exist. They smell better, they burn cleaner, they last longer. They're expensive enough that in a household like yours they appear at perhaps Christmas and Easter, lit with the specific reverence of objects too costly for casual use. You're not burning beeswax candles on a Tuesday in November. Your stock of tallow candles is a specific concern, because you started winter with 24 and you have 9 left. 9 candles. November. The math of this, the multiplication of nights remaining and hours of darkness and the minimum light you need to do anything after the sun goes down, produces an answer that makes you stand at the candle shelf and count again in case you miscounted. You didn't miscount. 9 candles. Your mother knows. Of course she knows. She knows everything about the state of the household with a precision that you sometimes find faintly uncanny, like she's running a continuous audit of every resource, every stock, every supply, in the background of everything else she does. She doesn't say anything about the candles. She just uses them less, extinguishing them before you might have, doing more of the evening work by firelight alone, which gives you enough light to spin but not enough to read by. Not that you have much to read, but enough to work the wool by hand, to mend things, to do the close work that keeps the household running. The fire, though, the fire is the real light source. In the evenings, you all move close to it, not just for warmth, but for light. The fire in a Tudor house is the television and the heater and the lamp all at once. It commands the attention of the room. People face it. People organise themselves around it. The conversations that happen in its light, which means that the social life of the household, the moments of genuine connection, happen in this warm, reddish light that makes everyone's faces glow slightly. There is something almost involuntarily beautiful about this, even in the middle of a hard winter. Not beautiful enough to make up for being cold and worried about the wood supply, but present. There is one place in Thornwick that is reliably warm. The church. St. Mary's has stone walls, 18 inches thick that hold cold in summer and hold warmth in winter. It has 4 large candles burning at the altar at all services, donated by the parish as a whole from the church candle fund that parishioners contribute to at Michaelmas. It has a congregation of maybe 100 people who pack into the nave for the main Sunday service and generate collectively a warmth that is genuinely noticeable. The priest is Father Edmund. He's in his mid-40s, from a village 10 miles west, assigned to Thornwick 6 years ago when the old priest died. He takes the religious reforms of the last several reigns with the specific pragmatism of a man who has watched the official religion change twice in his lifetime and expects to watch it change again and would like to continue having a career through all of these changes. Under Edward the Boy King, the services became simpler, more English, the Latin pushed back. Now, under Mary, they're creeping back towards something older, more elaborate. Father Edmund navigates this with the diplomatic skill of someone who genuinely believes that God doesn't particularly care about the specific liturgical format as long as the general principle is maintained, and who expresses this view to no one but expresses it through his actions every week. The point, for your purposes, is that Sunday service in the winter is partly religious observance and partly a collective heating exercise. Everyone comes, not all of them in a state of spiritual urgency. They come because it's the middle of winter and the church is warm and there are other people there, and the human animal has a deep, unironic need to be in the same room as other human animals and feel the warmth of them. This Sunday, the service is longer than usual because Father Edmund has chosen the reading about the loaves and fishes. You know, he chose it in part because he knows that this reading, in the middle of a hard winter, when people are looking at their stores and doing the math of remaining months, has a specific resonance. The multiplication of limited resources. The idea that what you have might be enough even when the numbers say it isn't. He's not subtle about it. He looks several times at the congregation in a way that is clearly intended to be pastoral. You're packed in shoulder to shoulder with neighbours. The smell of the congregation in winter is distinctive. Wood smoke and lanolin and damp wool and the shared exhalation of 100 people who have all walked to church through cold air. It's not unpleasant. It smells like belonging to something. You find a spot near Margaret Hobson's family, which is strategically useful because Margaret generates warmth the way a small furnace does, and is also positioned near a pillar that blocks one of the side drafts. Will wriggles next to you. He does not have the temperament for standing still in church, but he has learned that the consequences of not standing still in church are immediate and specific and provided by your Father's right hand. So he manages it through a sustained internal effort that you can actually see in his face. Baby Marjorie is held by your mother and is mercifully asleep, head heavy on Joan's shoulder, mouth slightly open, unimpressed by the theological implications of the occasion. Grandmother Bess stands very still. She's been coming to this church for 65 years. She knows all the words. She says them quietly, her lips moving, her eyes focused on something somewhere beyond the stone walls. You've never asked her what she's thinking in church. You suspect it's complicated. The candles at the altar, 4 of them, thick and straight, giving a light that in the stone interior of the church has a quality that's almost golden. Not golden because of the colour exactly, but because it's warm-coloured against the grey of the stone and the dark of the winter morning outside, and there is something in the human visual system that responds to that combination with something close to relief, After the service, people don't leave immediately. They stand in the churchyard or in the porch talking. In warmer weather, this is a leisurely social event. In November, it's a more concentrated exchange. People sharing what they know and what they need with the directness of a community that understands that information and mutual aid are survival technologies. You overhear that Robert Thatcher, the farrier's son, was taken ill on Thursday with a fever, that the miller's cart lost a wheel on the frozen road to the market, and the mill was behind 3 days while it was repaired. That someone, the name isn't carried far enough for you to hear, has already run out of their stored apples and is asking around for whether anyone has extra to sell or trade. Information moving through the village like warmth moves through the church, imperfectly, with gaps, but moving. Your father speaks for a few minutes with the blacksmith's son, a young man of 20 named John, who has the particular solidity of someone who works metal every day, and whose handshake is reportedly like gripping a wooden door. They talk about the road conditions and the merchant's expected arrival, and whether the cold is likely to hold this hard through December. My grandfather said when the snow came early and the cold came hard before Advent, it usually meant a bitter January, John says. He says it factually, not alarmingly. In Thornwick, the knowledge of weather patterns is held in the same way as the knowledge of soil and animals, transmitted through generations, empirical, imperfect, but more reliable than nothing. Same as my mother said, or father says. They look at the sky, which is doing its flat grey thing, impassive and non-committal above the church tower. Well, John says. Well, your father says. There is no resolution to this conversation because there is no resolution to the weather. They're not solving a problem. They're acknowledging one. This is its own kind of useful. The week after that Sunday has a quality of grey insistence to it. The cold doesn't get worse. It doesn't get better either. It simply persists, the way cold in the north of England can persist, a sustained atmospheric stubbornness that makes you believe it has intentions. You develop a routine built specifically around the management of warmth. Morning, rebuild the fire. This is now your job in the explicit way that things become your job once you've demonstrated you can do them under pressure. Your father observed you do it the morning after the fire went out, said nothing at the time, and then said, when you asked if you should take the fire watch, you're doing it already. End of conversation. You take the fire watch. It means sleeping lighter, waking twice in the night to check the state of the coals, adding wood or letting it lie depending on what you find. It means you're always slightly more tired than the day before, a tiredness that accumulates like the ash in the hearth, a slow build that you manage with the same patience you apply to everything else. The daily routine of cold management. You learn where the warmest spots in the house are at different times of day, and you steer your family toward them like a shepherd. The spot by the east wall in the morning, when the sun, if it appears, gives a faint warmth through the daub. The specific area 3 feet from the fire where you can sit without the direct heat drying your eyes. The way the goats, Patience and Goodwife, position themselves with an animal accuracy that you've started using as a guide. Where the goat sits is slightly warmer than where the goat doesn't sit. Your father weaves. Your mother spins and tends the baby and manages the food stores with the careful accounting of someone who knows the numbers and checks them every day. Will is set to carding and mostly does it, with periodic negotiations about how much is a reasonable day's carding for an 8-year-old that he always loses, but continues to pursue with impressive tenacity. Grandmother Bess does something you only gradually come to understand as a very specific kind of labour. She talks. She talks to Will, and she talks to you, and she talks to your mother, not aimlessly, not in the way that lonely people talk to fill silence, but with the specific purpose of teaching. She's teaching Will the names of the stars, as many as can be seen from the window on a clear night, using the memory trick she learned as a child, little stories attached to each constellation. She's teaching you the properties of the herbs drying in the rafters, the differences between them, what they're for, how much is safe, how much isn't. She's teaching your mother nothing, because your mother already knows everything, but she tells her stories sometimes in the evening, stories about the village 40 years ago, the people who lived here and what they did and what happened to them, and your mother listens with an attention that suggests she's filing it away somewhere useful. This is what you pass down in a household that can't afford books. You pass it down with words, with demonstration, with the patient repetition of knowledge that costs nothing to transmit and is worth everything to receive. Will get sick on a Monday. It starts in the morning as a heaviness. He comes to breakfast slower than usual, sits by the fire with his bowl but eats without the usual intensity, his spoon moving but his eyes somewhere else. You notice it first because you notice Will the way older siblings notice younger siblings, not with constant attention, but with a baseline monitoring that registers deviation. Will. He looks at you. His eyes have the slightly glassy quality of beginning fever. Your stomach does something specific. You reach across and put your hand on his forehead. The heat of his skin against your cool palm is unmistakable. Your mother, from across the room, doesn't look up from Marjorie. How bad? Started. You don't have more description than that. Your mother's vocabulary for illness doesn't have many intermediate stages. She comes over, her hand on his forehead where yours was. A pause. She looks at him in the way she looks at things she's trying to assess. Not with worry, exactly, but with concentrated attention. In bed, she says. Will opens his mouth. In bed, she says again. He goes to bed without argument, which is the clearest sign of how he's actually feeling, because Will Sutton arguing with your mother is as reliable as the church bells, and its absence is its own kind of alarm. The fever question. In a Tudor household, a sick child in winter is a calculation with several possible outcomes, and not all of them are the one you want. You know this. You've known it since you were old enough to understand why there are 4 names your mother whispers and doesn't talk about otherwise. The fever might be nothing. Might be the mild winter sickness that half the village gets and shakes off in 4 days. Might be something worse. Might be something that starts as something mild and becomes something worse because the cold, the sustained cold of the house that you're always managing but never quite defeating, pulls at a sick body the way a current pulls at someone trying to swim upstream. Your grandmother moves to the herbs. The rafters of the back room are hung with them, tied in bunches dried from summer, rosemary, sage, thyme, feverfew, chamomile, pennyroyal, elderflower. Also bulkier things. Dried apples threaded on string, bunches of dried onion, one last cluster of dried rose hips from the hedge at the edge of the common field. She selects chamomile, elderflower, a small amount of feverfew. She makes a tea, or what passes for one, in the small iron pot, boiling water and steeping the herbs and adding a piece of dried honeycomb she keeps in the wooden box on the shelf. One of 3 pieces left from the summer trading at the village market kept specifically for this. The honey cost more than you want to think about. She takes it to Will without ceremony. Drink it. He drinks it. He makes a face because feverfew is bitter enough to make your eyes water, and the honey only partially compensates. She watches him drink the whole thing. More in 2 hours, she says to your mother. Your mother nods. You watch this exchange and understand what's not being said in it, which is, we're doing what we can, which is what people have always done, which works some of the time and doesn't work other times, and we don't know yet which kind of time this is. The nights are the hardest part of winter, not just cold, dark. When I say dark, I mean the specific darkness of a world without electric light, without gas light, without any light source at all except fire and candle. The sun goes down before 5 in the afternoon. By 5, Thornwick is as dark as anywhere on earth is dark when there are no lights anywhere. The moon, when it appears, gives enough light to see shapes by, to navigate between the house and the well without falling. But on cloudy nights, on the nights when the sky is sealed over and the moon is invisible, the darkness outside is complete, and the darkness inside is nearly complete. Inside, after the candles are extinguished, the fire is the only light. Firelight is warm and variable and alive in the way fire is alive, never the same for 2 seconds together, throwing dancing light and shadows that require the brain to do constant small adjustments. In the middle of the night, when the fire is burned down to coals and you're doing the fire check, the room is lit by the dull red glow of the coals and nothing else, and that light is barely enough to see by, and makes everything at the edges of the room into shapes that require a second look. You get up twice in the night, every night. The first time is around midnight, or what you estimate as midnight from the feel of how long you've slept and the position of the moon if there's moon. The second time is around 3 or 4, the deep cold hours before dawn when the temperature in the room has done its most significant dropping. And the difference between a good coal bed and a dying one is the difference between a warm morning and the morning you already had once and don't want to repeat. You do this in the dark, by touch and smell, and the faint heat sense you've developed for the hearth, the way your face can feel the warmth from it as you approach, and can tell from that warmth whether it's sufficient or insufficient. Tonight, on the 3rd night of Will's fever, you're up 3 times. He's restless. When a fever is working through a body, the body doesn't sleep the way it normally sleeps. It cycles through something more troubled, a half-sleep full of small movements and occasional sounds, and you can hear it from your palate, and it keeps you near the surface of sleep rather than in it, ready to respond if the sounds change quality. Around 2 in the morning, or what you think is 2, he wakes. Agnes. You're up before you've fully decided to be up. He's sitting on the pallet, sweating in the way a fever sweats, dampness visible on his forehead in the firelight. His eyes are more focused than they were yesterday, less glassy. The fever has changed quality in the night. Not gone, but different. You put your hand on his head, still warm, but different warm. The focused, hard heat of a fever at its height has softened to something more diffuse. I'm thirsty, he says. You get water from the pitcher. Cold, because there's been no heat on the water since before midnight. He drinks half of it and makes a face, and then drinks the other half because he's genuinely thirsty. You sit beside him on the pallet while he finishes. Am I going to be all right? He asks. He's 8 years old. He asks it in the specific way that 8-year-olds ask it, with genuine uncertainty and genuine fear and the slightly formal phrasing that comes from not quite having the language for what he's actually asking. Yes, you say, and you believe it, or you're nearly certain of it. which in a Tudor winter is as close to certainty as most things get. How do you know? Because the fever's turning, I can feel it. Grandmother Bess says that's what it feels like when a fever turns. He thinks about this. He's a child who takes information seriously and processes it carefully, and you can see him doing it, taking the information and the source and weighing them. Is it what she said? Yes. He seems satisfied with this. He lies back down and you arrange the blanket over him and he closes his eyes. He's asleep in about 3 minutes. You sit there a little longer, your hand still on the blanket near where his shoulder is, feeling the warmth of him through it, and you let out a breath that comes from somewhere deeper than your lungs. The fire is good. The coals are bright. The room is cold. It is always cold, but it is the manageable cold, the contained cold, the cold you are managing rather than the cold that is managing you. You go back to your pallet. You lie down. Outside, somewhere in the village, a dog barks once and is quiet. The cold presses down on the roof like a hand. You sleep. Will is better in 5 days. Not strong. Thin in the way people are thin after a fever has used them up. But better, up and moving, eating with something approaching his usual commitment, asking questions again, which you discover you've missed. December comes. The light gets shorter. The days are so short now that by the time you've done the morning's work and eaten and done the afternoon's work, it's dark again, and the day feels less like a day and more like a long gap between 2 nights. But something else happens in December that matters. The village becomes slightly more collective. It's not planned. It's not organised. It's the organic response to cold that human communities have probably been making since before recorded history. People move toward each other. They find reasons to be in the same space. Neighbours who might go 3 days in summer without speaking are suddenly appearing at each other's doors with small reasons to visit. Returning a borrowed tool, bringing over some of the extra beans Margaret Hobson mentioned weeks ago, asking about the road to the market. The visits are not primarily about the stated reason. The stated reason is just the mechanism. The actual function of the visits is warmth. The warmth of numbers. The warmth of company. The reassurance that comes from being seen by other people and seeing them in return, from knowing that if something went wrong, someone would know about it. Your house has, on a good evening in December, somewhere between 10 and 12 people in it. Margaret Hobson and her 2 eldest daughters, the blacksmith's son John and his wife, who is heavily pregnant and has taken to visiting twice a week for reasons that are nominally about borrowing your mother's spinning whirl, but are actually about the warmth and company. Old Robert from the end of the village, who's been a widower for 3 years and whose house is cold in a way that goes beyond temperature. A girl named Ellen from 4 doors down who has decided, with the confident arbitrariness of a 12-year-old, that she is your best friend, and who visits with the regularity of someone keeping a schedule. In the evenings, when the work is done and the fire is built up and there are more people than usual in the room, Grandmother Bess tells stories. This is her gift to the winter. To all the winters she's survived, probably. She tells stories the way good storytellers tell stories, not performing exactly, not reciting, but speaking directly to the people in front of her, as though the story is something being discovered by all of you simultaneously, rather than something she already knows the end of. She tells the stories of the village, people who lived here 50 and 60 years ago, their particular natures and their particular fates, the strange and funny and sad things that happened to them, and that time has turned into something that can be told. She tells stories from before the village, older things, stories about the region, about the history of the land you're living on, where the names come from and what the Danes left behind and why the old earthwork on the north side of the hill is shaped the way it is. She tells stories from further back than memory, things that passed down to her from her own grandmother. Plague stories, war stories, the winter stories that every generation seems to carry forward. The years when the cold was worse, or the harvest failed, or something happened that tested people past what seemed possible. She tells these without moralizing. She's not explaining the stories. She's letting them exist. And the room around her, in the firelight, is warm with people who are not so cold tonight, who are not so alone tonight, who have spent the day doing what has to be done and are now being given, for free, the gift of having their attention held and their imagination fed. This too is a technology of survival, an old one, maybe the oldest one, Christmas. In Tudor England, Christmas is real and substantial in a way that the modern version, for all its noise and commercial energy, doesn't quite match, because Tudor Christmas has an urgency behind it that ours doesn't. It comes at the exact midpoint of the hardest season. It comes when the stores are depleted but not yet critically low, when the worst of winter is still ahead but you've survived the first half. It comes on purpose at the darkest point of the year, the solstice behind it by 4 days, the light beginning its imperceptible, barely believable return. It lasts properly 12 days. The 12 days of Christmas are not a metaphor. They're the structure by which a pre-industrial northern community organises its midwinter survival. You don't work except what has to be done for survival. You feast, or you feast relative to the rest of the year, which means you eat better than usual and you give each other what you can. Your father kills the smaller goat on the 23rd. He does it quickly and practically, the way your family does the things that have to be done, and by Christmas Eve your mother has produced from that goat a quantity of food that seems, by the standards of the preceding weeks, almost extravagant. Roasted meat, broth, the smaller cuts preserved in salt for the days after, a dish made from the liver with dried herbs and some of the dried apples from the rafters, sweet, sharp and rich. The beeswax candles come out. This moment every year has a quality that you would have to call ritual if you wanted to describe it accurately. Your mother takes them from the wooden box on the shelf, 3 of them, white and firm and slightly fragrant, and she sets them in the iron candle holders on the table and lights them with a taper from the fire. And the light they give is different from tallow candles, cleaner and brighter, and with a sweetness in the smell, and the room changes around them. It sounds small. A clean candle, 3 clean candles. But you've been living in a house lit by tallow and firelight for 2 months. The specific quality of beeswax candlelight, which is fuller and more even and casts shadows that are more defined, is striking enough that everyone in the room goes a little quiet for a moment when they first see it. Will stares at them. Why is it different? He asks. Beeswax burns cleaner, you say. Why do we only use them at Christmas? Grandmother Bess from across the room. Because if we used them all the time, they wouldn't be special. Will thinks about this with the expression he uses for things he's filing away for later reconsideration. The 12 days. You visit and are visited. The church is full, decorated with holly and ivy and whatever else is still green and findable in December. And Father Edmund wears his best vestments, and the singing is full, in a way it isn't for ordinary Sundays. Voices adding on to voices, The old songs that are sung by a village that knows them collectively, learned by children who learned them from their parents who learned them from theirs. Your family exchanges gifts. This is modest, very modest. A pair of knitted gloves from your grandmother for each of you, because she knits all winter and has been saving the best for Christmas. A small wooden toy your father carved for Will, a rough horse with 4 legs that are slightly different lengths, but definitely a horse. An embroidered handkerchief from your mother to Grandmother Bess, a small piece of work that must have taken weeks, done in the firelit evenings when everyone thought she was just mending. For you, from the wooden chest, a small comb, carved horn, smooth and fine with narrow teeth. You've been using a wooden comb that your mother made in a spare hour, functional but rough, that catches and pulls. This one is smooth. You run your thumb along the teeth. It is objectively a comb. You look at your mother. She has the expression she gets when she's given something correctly, a controlled satisfaction, a measured pleasure in precision. Thank you, you say. The words are nowhere near sufficient. She knows that. She nods. These gifts cost almost nothing in money. They cost time, and in winter, time is the one resource that isn't immediately scarce, if you manage everything else well enough to have evenings that aren't consumed by emergency. The gifts are made of evenings, made of the hours that cold and darkness create, and that the fire makes habitable. January in the East. Riding of Yorkshire is an experience that would test the patience of a saint and the resources of a much better provision household than yours. The cold in January has a different character from November cold. November cold is an announcement. January cold is a settled fact. It has the quality of something that has been here long enough to have opinions about it, that has moved in and is not leaving until it feels like it. The woodpile is lower than you want it to be. You go up Brant Hill twice in the first week of January, and come back both times with less than you'd hoped, because others have been up there before you, and because the fallen branches you didn't collect in November have mostly been collected by someone else, and because the ones that remain are large enough to need a saw and an axle and a cart to move, which you don't have. The dried dung supplements the wood. You burn it without ceremony. It smells, and then the smell becomes part of the room smell, and the room smell becomes part of the world smell, and you stop noticing it the way you stop noticing any persistent thing that has become part of the texture of your days. Your father burns the small bench at the end of the first week of February. He does it matter-of-factly, takes the bench from the corner where it lives, examines it for a moment, and breaks it apart with his hands, which can do this kind of thing without tools because 40 years of working with wood and wool have made them into instruments of considerable force. Will watches him do it from across the room. Why? Will asks. Wood is wood, your father says. He puts the pieces on the fire. The bench burns well. Dry oak, well seasoned, gives good heat. The room, for the first time in a week, gets warm enough that you can feel it in the air 2 feet from the fire rather than just 6 inches. Your father goes back to the loom without further comment. Grandmother Bess looks at you from across the room. Her expression says, "This is where we are," not accusation, assessment. This is where you are. February is the month that tests things. The stores are at their lowest point. The cold is at its hardest. The light is returning, but not fast enough to be clearly perceivable. Not fast enough that you've started thinking of it as real. People get sick. People get accidents. The roads freeze and the road to the market is impassable for 2 weeks, and the world contracts to the village. But the village contracts with you. Margaret Hobson arrives on a Tuesday with those extra beans she mentioned in November, carried in a sack over her arm with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone who has decided not to make it into more than it is. She stays for the afternoon. She and your grandmother drink something that isn't quite tea, a herbal mixture that Grandmother Bess makes from the rafters, slightly bitter and slightly warming, and they talk in the way they've talked for 40 years, the specific register of old friends who share a history long enough that half of their sentences are understood before they're completed. John the blacksmith's wife has her baby on a Wednesday, a boy, healthy, demanding, and apparently deeply committed to existing at full volume. The village knows about this within hours, the way the village knows everything, and there's a collective exhale of relief because a new birth in February is always slightly anxious, and this one went well. Your mother goes to help with the washing and the first recovery, along with 3 other women from the nearby houses, the small informal network that appears automatically when it's needed and disperses again without requiring recognition or thanks. You watch them go. Will is at the loom, learning his first actual weaving, basic over-under on a small practice frame your father made him. Grandmother Bess is dozing by the fire. Marjorie is asleep. You sit for a moment alone. Your hands are in your lap. They're red from the cold, and there's a crack on the back of your right index finger from the dry air and the repeated wetting and drying that everything does in winter. It doesn't hurt exactly. It has the presence of something you're used to. You look at the fire. The fire is good. You built it well this morning and fed it carefully, and it is producing exactly the quality of heat it needs to produce, steady and controlled and efficient. You have 9 pieces of wood left in the indoor pile, plus the field dung in the basket, plus whatever is left in the lean-to, which you haven't checked today, but you know approximately, because you always know approximately. 3 weeks until the equinox. 3 weeks until the balance of light and dark tips back the other way. 3 weeks until the cold begins very slowly to consider other possibilities. 3 weeks. You can do 3 weeks. The day the cold breaks is not a dramatic day. It's a Tuesday in the 2nd week of March, and you go outside in the morning and the air has changed. Not warm, not spring, but different. The specific, total hard cold of January and February has softened at the edges. There's something in the air that has a different quality. Something that if you pressed it for a description you might call less final, less committed. The well bucket is not frozen for the first time in 6 weeks. The mud in the yard is mud rather than iron-cold compacted earth. Actual mud. Mud that moves under your feet and sticks to your patterns and is, objectively, a significant inconvenience, and which you stand in for a moment feeling something very close to joy. You look at the yard, at the pale sky above the village, at the smear of something grey-blue at the horizon that might, tentatively, be a hint of what spring eventually looks like. A sparrow has appeared on the fence post. You don't know where it came from. You haven't seen sparrows since autumn. You stare at it. It looks back at you with the absolute self-possession of a sparrow who does not know or care what winter has just cost you, who has simply arrived in a world that is now slightly more habitable and is conducting its bird business accordingly. You breathe in, cold air still, but cold air with something in it that wasn't there yesterday. The smallest possible, barely detectable beginning of something else. You turn and go back inside. The cold's breaking, you say. Your father at the loom doesn't stop weaving. Good, he says. Your grandmother opens her eyes from what may or may not have been sleep. 3 more cold weeks, she says, then mud, then the first green. Will looks up from the carding. How much longer till I don't have to card every day? Until April, your grandmother says. In April the wool will be out. We'll digest this. That's a long time. Yes, she says, it is. It always is. Let me take a moment to step back and show you what you've actually done this winter. Because you've been inside it, living it day by day, and sometimes when you're inside something you don't quite see the shape of it. You heated a house all winter with no system, no infrastructure, no technology more complex than a piece of flint and a pile of wood. You managed a fuel supply that was never quite sufficient, supplemented it through physical labour in cold weather, and you didn't run out. You got close. The bench is gone and the wood pile is a few pieces of despair at the bottom. But you got through. You managed a sick child through a winter fever without a doctor, without a hospital, without any medication beyond the dried herbs in the rafters and the knowledge of how to use them that your grandmother spent decades acquiring. He survived. You kept a 9-month-old baby warm and fed through the coldest winter in 40 years. Marjorie Sutton is fine. She's better than fine. She's recently learned to pull herself upright using the leg of the loom, a development that your father notices and says nothing about, but whose expression when he notices it is a thing you filed away carefully. You kept your father able to work. The cloth is done. The merchant's agent came from York on a Wednesday in late February, over roads that were technically passable, and he looked at the cloth with the careful assessment of someone whose job is to not be impressed, and he bought it, and the money that went into the box under the floorboards is the money that makes the next year possible. You fed everyone, not well, never as well as you'd like. The January pottage was what it was, which was grey and thin and not entirely flavourful, but it was hot and there was enough of it and everyone ate it, and they woke up the next morning and kept going. This is what it means to survive a Tudor winter. Not heroically, not dramatically. Day by day, fire check by fire check, candle rationed against night, wood counted against cold, the endless small negotiations between what you have and what you need conducted with skill and habit, and the accumulated knowledge of everyone who came before you and figured it out and passed it down. The people who passed it down are still here in the habits and the knowledge, in the way your father breaks a fire log without wasting the split, in the way your mother arranges the stores with the precision of someone who has counted forward and backward across a winter 100 times. In Grandmother Bess, 65 years of winters, standing at the edge of the woodpile with her canvas bag, reading the cold the way your father reads thread. And now it's late March. The light that seemed permanently absent has been quietly, incrementally returning. A minute more each day, then 2. Then the days suddenly feel like they have middles again, and afternoons that are actually afternoon-coloured rather than dusk-coloured. The goats go out. The first time you open the door in the morning and Patience and Goodwife step out into the yard and stand there in the slightly warmer air with an expression of absolute goat satisfaction, you feel something that might be happiness on their behalf, which is possibly a strange thing to feel about goats, but here you are. The rushes on the floor are replaced. This is a day of work, taking up the old rushes and carrying them out to the compost heap, which your father says will improve the kitchen garden significantly, and the rest of you try not to think too carefully about given what's in there, and then spreading the new rushes that you and Will and Ellen from 4 doors down cut from the stream bank on a cold March morning. New rushes smell green. They smell like spring, which is a smell so specific and so anticipated that when it fills the house you have to stand still for a moment and just receive it. The carding is done. The card and spin cycle of wool processing that's been running all winter will shift into its summer mode, outdoors, in the longer light, with the new fleece from the shearing that's coming in April. Your father has started a new length on the loom, already thinking ahead to the autumn sale, the rhythm of the year running forward even as winter ends. Will turns 9 in April. He announces this several weeks in advance with the energy of someone who has been doing calculations and has concluded that 9 is significantly older than 8 in ways he hasn't fully worked out yet. Your mother makes him a cake from the last of the dried apples and some honey and the rough flour from the bottom of the barrel, and it's dense and not entirely sweet. And Will eats 2 pieces with the focused pleasure of someone consuming the exact best thing. Grandmother Bess watches him eat and says nothing for a while. Then she says, 9 is old enough to start learning the loom. Will looks at his father. Your father looks at Will, assessing him with the same look he applies to everything that might eventually become cloth. The quality question, the judgment of potential. After shearing, he says, when the spring work's done, you'll start on the small frame. Will's face does something complicated. He has been complaining about carding for the entirety of winter, on the grounds that it is boring and endless and thankless. He has never expressed any interest in the loom. But the loom is the craft. The loom is the thing. He clearly knew this was coming and clearly has feelings about it that haven't resolved into a single emotion yet. All right, he says finally. He goes back to his cake. Grandmother Bess looks at you across the table. You did it, her look says. Not dramatically, not with any large motion. Just the acknowledgement of shared knowledge, the recognition between 2 people who both lived through the same winter. You did it. Another one down. That evening you go outside after supper. Just you. Just to stand in the yard for a few minutes before bed. The sky is clear. You can see stars. In winter, the sky's often too clouded and too dark for real stargazing. In spring, the clearer nights come back. You can see the ones Grandmother Bess named for Will. Orion moving west, lower on the horizon than he was in December. The plough, reliable and bright. The faint smear of the Milky Way above the hill. The air is cold. It's still cold at night in late March, but cold and clear is different from cold and grey. Cold and clear has a quality of possibility about it. Cold and grey is just endurance. You breathe in and breathe out. The village is quiet around you. Smoke from chimneys, the distant sound of someone's dog, the occasional deeper sound, something moving in the fields at the edge of the village, maybe a deer, maybe nothing. Behind you, through the closed door, the sounds of the house. Your father's loom has stopped for the night. Your mother's voice saying something to the baby. Will's argumentative contribution to some discussion you can't quite hear. Grandmother Bess's particular laugh, low and dry, that she uses for things that are genuinely funny. The sparrow is gone from the fence post, long since. But tomorrow there will be more birds. There will be more every morning now for weeks, as the thing that got colder and darker and quieter slowly reverses itself. The first robin, then the chaffinches, then the swallows, if you're lucky, small black arcs over the field in April that mean you've made it, definitively and undeniably, to the other side. Your hands hurt a little. They hurt most nights now from the cold and the drying and the work. You flex them in the air, feeling the stiffness. You think about Grandmother Bess's hands, the way they look now at 65. What 65 winters has done to them. The knuckles, the skin, the marks of everything she's made and mended and managed. They're her history, those hands. You look at your own hands in the faint starlight. 14 years. This is what they know already. How to build a fire from almost nothing. How to read the cold from the way the air feels on your face before the fire is lit. How to judge a wood pile. How to make herbs into medicine. How to carry weight down an icy hill without falling. How to wake twice in the night to check something that matters and go back to sleep and do it again. How to hold a family together by the thread of attention, of knowing where the warmth is and steering everyone toward it, of doing the specific small things that need to be done before anyone has to ask. You're 14. In 20 years you'll be 34. In 40, 54. In 50, 64. And if you're lucky, the way Grandmother Bess has been lucky, you'll be standing somewhere still in a cold spring night, looking at the stars, holding a winter's worth of knowledge in your hands. You won't be afraid of the cold. You're already not afraid of the cold. You're something better than unafraid. You understand it. You know its dimensions and its rhythms, and you know that it ends, that it always ends, that the light always comes back. This year, this winter, this specific cold that pressed down on the house from October to March and tested everything you had, and found that everything you had was just barely enough. You go back inside. The door closes behind you. The smell of the house, wood smoke and stew and the goat smell that's faded. Now the goats are back outside, and underneath it the clean, cool smell of the new rushes, and over it all the smell of people, of family, the smell of a specific place and the specific lives being lived in it. Firelight. Your grandmother is telling Will something, bent over the small wooden horse your father made him at Christmas, demonstrating something about the shape of the legs with her finger. Your mother is at the table with Marjorie on her lap, not doing anything, just holding her. That's all. Just holding a 9-month-old who's awake and interested in the candle flame on the table, and not yet old enough to know that she doesn't need to be held, so she's being held. Your father is not at the loom. He's at the table, a rare thing, just sitting, just there, and he's looking at something in his hands that you can't quite see, turning it over, and when you look you realise it's a piece of the bench, a small piece from the carved edge, the one decorative thing on it, a small spiral that his father probably carved there before your father was born, and which he kept when he burned the rest. He looks up when you come in. He doesn't say anything. He puts the piece of wood in his shirt pocket. You sit down at the fire. Centuries from now, this house will be gone. The daub will dissolve back into the earth. The timber will rot. The rushes will be long soil. Even the stone of St. Mary's Church, that cold, beautiful building where the village packed itself together for warmth, will have been rebuilt and restored so many times it will be continuous only in the most technical sense. But the hill will still be there. Brant Hill, with its view of the valley and its common grazing land at the top. Someone will stand on that hill centuries from now and look at the same landscape you looked at, the same curve of valley and the same line of the moors to the north, and feel the same wind come off that direction, and have approximately the same conversation with their own coat. The cold will still come. Different people, newer houses, with glass in the windows and radiators and the strange, taken-for-granted miracle of central heating, will still feel December arriving, and will still feel Somewhere in the evolved animal of themselves, the instinct to build up, to stock up, to move toward warmth, to gather. Because you don't forget this entirely, none of us do. Somewhere deep and wordless in what the human animal is, there's the knowledge of what cold means, what fire means, what it costs to keep the warmth going, and what it feels like when it's maintained, and what it means to come inside from the cold to a room where someone is awake and the fire is burning. That's still in us. It's there tonight. Whatever kind of warm room you're in. Your eyes are heavy. The day was long, the way all days are long, but this one had something good in it. The clearer air, the almost warmth of the late afternoon, Marjorie standing up on her own twice without holding anything. The fire in the hearth is built up for the night. You did it yourself. 3 pieces of the right size, arranged in the right relationship, covered at the edges with ash to bank the heat. You checked it twice. It'll hold till morning. Your body knows this and relaxes around the knowing of it. The specific tension that runs through you every night. The background anxiety of the fire's maintenance. The monitoring of cold and fuel and warmth lets go. Just slightly. Just enough. You pull your blanket up. The rushes under the pallet smell faintly of spring, the new ones from the stream bank. It's a good smell, a quiet smell. The smell of something that was one thing and is becoming another. The sounds of the house settle into night sounds. Marjorie breathing in the way babies breathe, quick and light and irregular, that sound that parents learn to hear from anywhere in the room. The small sounds of the fire, a shift of a log, a soft settle of coals. The wind outside, present but not hard, moving around the house without malice, just moving. Your father's voice from somewhere in the dark, low and private, saying something to your mother that you can't hear and don't need to. Will is already asleep. You can tell by his breathing, which changes in sleep to something slower and slightly deeper. He's warm. The fever is a memory, already integrated into the fabric of the winter, another thing that happened and was handled. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. You are safe enough. This house, these walls that are sticks and clay and animal hair, and 40 years of winter survived within them. These people, this fire, this specific particular winter night in 1554 in the East Riding of Yorkshire, in a village called Thornwick, that history will not record because history is mostly interested in the large-scale events and the powerful people and the forces that shape the century. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything. Let the cold stay outside. Let it sit against the walls and press down on the thatch and breathe through the crack by the north corner that was stuffed with rags in October. Let it do what it does. In here, the fire holds. In here, the rushes are green and the smell of spring is already in the floor, and Marjorie is almost walking, and Will learn the loom in April, and your father's cloth is done and the merchant paid, and grandmother Bess is 65 years of winter in the world and still standing. Your hands know things. Your body knows things. Your mind. Running quieter now, slower, letting the day go piece by piece, the morning bucket of ice water, the firewood, the smell of Margaret Hobson's cloak, the sound of Will arguing about carding, the sparrow, the stars, all of it loosening, all of it becoming something less sharp and more general, becoming the texture of a day rather than its particulars. Let it go. You've been here all winter. You know how this ends. The cold will end. The light will come back. The swallows will return to the field in April, and your father will watch them from the door of the lean-to, with his hand on the frame and his face doing The thing it does in April, the specific expression of someone who has done the hard part and can see the other side of it. And you will have done it. You already have. Sleep now. The way Agnes slept some of these nights, when everything was handled and the fire was right and there was nothing left to do but let the darkness be kind. Let your thoughts slow. Let them soften at the edges the way cold softens in March, the way ice becomes water, and water becomes the ground, and the ground becomes the green thing that grows from it. Let the warmth of wherever you are settle around you. You have heat. You have a roof. You have more certainty about tomorrow morning than Agnes did on any morning of that winter in that house, with that fire and those walls and that cold pressing down. You are warm. You're warm enough. You've already done the hard part. Rest in it. Let sleep come the way it came to a village in Yorkshire in the second week of March, when the cold began to mean something slightly less. Let it come in through the door you're leaving open for it now. Let the sounds of wherever you are go quiet and strange and distant, the way sounds go when sleep is taking you, the way the village went quiet on the good nights, the held breath quiet of a place that was surviving, that was managing, that was doing the thing human beings have always done in the cold and the dark, which is to hold on to each other and to the fire and to wait for the light. It always comes back. It always comes back. Good night.